For Stephen Harper, another day of troubling news overseas meant troubles of his own here at home. The Prime Minister faced more questions and criticism about foreign policy today at a Conservative caucus retreat in Ontario. Christina Lawand was there.
While the Prime Minister met with his caucus a safe distance away, these protesters came to share their fury.
Harper, Harper, shame on you!
Angry, the Prime Minister refuses to call for an immediate ceasefire in the Middle East.
And burning children and killing innocent people. I don't care each side. That's wrong, and this has to stop.
And while El Sadi Dad was invited to deliver her message directly to Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, Stephen Harper clearly wasn't swayed.
I'm not concerned or preoccupied in any way with reaction within individual communities. I think that reaction is very predictable.
Still no call for an immediate ceasefire. And when asked about today's civilian deaths in northern Lebanon, Harper responded without mentioning them.
Conditions have to be put in place to make a ceasefire possible and make it stable. And obviously, that isn't going to be the case as long as we have a terrorist organization that's initiating violence and won't cease its attacks.
And while Harper is making no apologies for his stand on the crisis, recent polls suggest it's beginning to cost his party, particularly in Quebec, where the Conservatives are hoping to make gains in the next election.
And Quebecers are, in general, very much opposed to the Bush administration, and there seems to be a perception that sticks that this position by the Harper government is somehow driven by a will to remain in tow of the U.S. position.
But others are praising the Prime Minister's stand, including long-standing Liberals with deep pockets like Jerry Schwartz. The business mogul signed this full-page ad in a Cornwall paper to thank Harper for standing by the people of Israel. And despite the polls and the protests, the Prime Minister says that his view, when properly understood, represents the view of most Canadians. Christina Lawand, CBC News, Ottawa.
And burning children and killing innocent people. I don't care each side. That's wrong, and this has to stop.
And while El Sadi Dad was invited to deliver her message directly to Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, Stephen Harper clearly wasn't swayed.
I'm not concerned or preoccupied in any way with reaction within individual communities. I think that reaction is very predictable.
Toronto Star.
Harper, you seem to be receiving new support from the Jewish community in Canada. How do you feel about that? Do you think that's a direct result of your Middle East policy? And on the flip side, are you concerned about the negative response among some in the Arab community?
Well, let me just say this. We know that this particular issue has pretty strong resonance in certain cultural communities in this country. That's not a mystery, you know, and people will have strongly held views, and it may or may not influence their vote in a future election. The government of Canada, as I say, we can't take positions based on the polls. We can't take positions based on, you know, reaction within certain domestic communities. These are serious international issues. There's not only a lot of lives at stake, there are a lot of long-term strategic interests of this country and of the world at stake here, and that's why we're taking the positions we're taking. And in particular, if I can you know, emphasize the two elements of our policy once again, peace and stability, and the threat that terrorist groups represent to that, not just in the Middle East, but in Afghanistan, in Toronto, where we've arrested some, and elsewhere. These are, you know, they're important strategic considerations here. At the same time, they're important Canadian interests and humanitarian concerns that we've had to deal with through evacuation and that we'll have to deal with, obviously, in the reconstruction of Lebanon. So these are the focuses of our activity. I'm not concerned or preoccupied in any way with reaction within individual communities, I think that reaction is very predictable.
Rob Lurie, CTV.
Mr. Harper, can you just tell us why you agreed to meet with those two demonstrators and what you've told them and what message you have for the other protesters who are outside now?
I think they're meeting with Minister McKay and Minister Verner, and we communicate as a government regularly with people obviously in various communities who have strong views, and we do want to make sure we understand all perspectives, notwithstanding the responsibility. And we have a responsibility, ultimately, as I say, to make the best judgment in collaboration with the international community on how to handle this. At the same time, we have a responsibility as a government to understand all perspectives. We understand that the perspectives of certain communities here are very unique. They're very intensely held. They can't and shouldn't be ignored. They can't and shouldn't guide all of our decisions at the same time. We have to make them on a wider basis, but they have to be understood. And certainly that's something that our ministers have been doing regularly.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much, everybody. Merci.
Very predictable.